With the ongoing war in Ukraine and increasing tensions with China, international relations look bleak. But our next guest says the world may actually be able to emerge from what he calls a geopolitical recession. Joining me now, Eurasia Group President Ian Bremmer. Ian, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Sure, my pleasure.
So let's start with China. Where are U.S. China relations in a post-balloon world?
Post-balloons, there's more than one, as you know. Look, this balloon program was meant to provide intelligence on the United States and others in the incident that the Chinese satellite program goes down. For example, if there were a confrontation between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. So it's not as if the Americans were particularly concerned that there was more intelligence being gotten by the Chinese over the course of that overflight. It's more that there's greater tensions broadly between the United States and China in an area of confrontation. And by the way, Biden had no intention of knocking that thing down, nor were they going to end the Blinken trip to go see Xi Jinping until it became public. And so we do need to recognize there's a performative aspect to U.S.-China relations because the domestic politics are so acute and they are so hawkish.
That's interesting, and I want to dig deeper into that. So in a rare moment of bipartisanship, both Republicans and Democrats want to get tougher on China. It's almost like two tough guys in a bar saying, no, I'm tougher, no, I'm tougher. That could lead to bad things, right?
It could. It could also lead to good things. I mean, to the extent that the Chinese understand that they don't get to play one side off against the other, they are less likely to want to push it against the United States. I mean, let's face it, we also saw Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, say that he's on the same team with Joe Biden on Russia-Ukraine. So the two most important national security challenges the United States faces right now, you actually have very broad agreement across the aisle, and that's a fairly important thing.
Yeah, that is interesting and unusual. One other China point. So recently I've seen that both exports to and imports from China have been increasing in dollar value. At the same time, the Biden administration says it wants to reduce the ability of U.S. firms to use, investment to fund Chinese technology. Those things seem in opposition. Where do we go from here?
They're not completely in opposition. Let's keep in mind, first of all, that you're talking about a post-COVID environment. So, of course, you're going to have a rebound. Also, an inflation environment. So the amount of trade, that those dollars are going to increase with the same level of goods. But the reality is that the United States and China are massively interdependent economically. That's not suddenly going away. That's also true of all major U.S. allies, whether it's the Germans, the Canadians, or the Japanese and the South Koreans. That's not going to change. What I will say, though, is that in areas of dual-use technology, in other words, pieces of economic trade and investment that are also usable for military and strategic purposes, the United States is actively decoupling from China. You've seen that with Huawei and 5G. You've seen it with semiconductors. You will see it with quantum computing. And the Chinese are starting to do export controls against the United States as well. Critical mineral development for things like EV batteries, also things like solar panel development. And so there is a tit for tat there. It is very competitive, but it is not a decoupling of the two economies.
One other area of competition that we're going to be talking about later in the show is artificial intelligence. Where does the U.S. stand in AI versus China?
These are the two AI superpowers in the world. The Chinese have more data. They have about 800 million people online. They have virtually no privacy. They're all using a small number of super apps where the data is consolidated. So to the extent that AI is driven more by data, the Chinese have an advantage. The Americans have better coders. They have more entrepreneurial technology companies. And so if the big advances are going to come from there, then the Americans have an advantage. And there's a huge debate between people that really know AI in the United States and China as to which of those arguments is going to win out. There's no question, though, these are the places you're going to see the major developments. It's not coming from the Europeans, not coming from the Japanese.
Really interesting. You recently wrote that we are in a geopolitical recession. Are we coming out of that, or we're still in it?
We have economic recessions, boom and bust cycles in the global economy. You also have boom and bust cycles in geopolitics. What happens is when the balance of power in global politics suddenly are unmoored from the institutions that you created to manage the world, whether it's NATO or the WTO, you get a lot more conflict, you get a lot more crises. As a consequence of that crisis, then the countries start creating new institutions or reforming the old ones. That's why NATO is now getting stronger. The G7 is more aligned. The EU has better governance. Why the Democrats and Republicans agree on things like Russia and China. So you do have the seeds of coming out of the geopolitical recession because of these crises. Next few years are dicey, but there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, that is good news. Look, before I let you go, I actually do want to ask about Russia and Ukraine. What do we need to know about that conflict right now in the depths of winter?
We need to know that the Ukrainians are deeply concerned about maintaining the levels of support that they've been getting for another 6 months, 12 months or more. Nobody thinks this war is over soon. The Ukrainians can lose, and that's why they continue to push even after they get the tanks. We want jets. We need more. Zelensky is facing an existential threat to his country. At the same time, no matter what happens in Ukraine, the Russians are going to lose. The NATO is expanding. The West is spending vastly more on defense. The Russian economy is decoupled from Europe. Their assets are being frozen. Putin is going to be the leader, the humiliated leader of a rogue state, not a global power. And that is a very serious problem when we think about 6,000 nuclear warheads and the disruptive capabilities that Putin has.
No winners here. Ian Bremmer, thank you so much for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.